Vextar adjusted his 3 eyes to focus on the classroom monitor, where the human exchange student sat completely oblivious to the trap that had just been set. The Galactic Military Academy's advanced toxicology class had turned into what could only be described as an intergalactic disaster waiting to happen. "By the 7 moons of Cathara," whispered Cheap, his gelatinous form quivering with nervous energy. "Did Xylox really just do what I think he did?" The answer was unfortunately yes. Xylox Greenfang, heir to one of the wealthiest mining families in the Andromeda sector, had indeed just slipped a concentrated dose of Zeronian Deathbloom extract into the human's water container. The same extract that could kill a Brontaxian elephant in under 30 seconds. The same extract that was currently sitting innocuously next to Marcus Thompson's elbow while he scribbled notes about chemical warfare countermeasures. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for exasperation among his people. This is precisely why interspecies education programs are a terrible idea. Someone always ends up dead, and it's never the one who deserves it. Professor Kilmthara, a towering insectoid with compound eyes that missed nothing, had stepped out to retrieve additional specimens from the biolab. Perfect timing, really. Nothing quite like an absent authority figure when students decided to commit accidental genocide. The classroom held 47 cadets from 12 different species, and every single one of them now knew exactly what Xylox had done. The crystalloids were humming in distress. The Vorthan twins were literally turning blue with panic. Even Rex Thor, who had never shown emotion beyond mild hunger, was gripping his desk with enough force to leave claw marks in the titanium surface. "Someone has to warn him," Pipara whispered, her tentacles writhing anxiously. "Humans are supposed to be allies now. The peace treaties alone." "Warn him?" Xylox's voice dripped with the kind of arrogance that only came with having daddy's money and mommy's complete lack of supervision. "Why would anyone warn an inferior species? This is natural selection at work." Vextar wanted to point out that natural selection typically didn't involve artificially introducing military-grade toxins into someone's drinking water, but he suspected the nuance would be lost on Xylox. The Greenfang family had built their fortune on mining operations that had accidentally poisoned 17 different ecosystems. Subtlety was not their strong suit. Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, continued taking notes with the kind of focused intensity that made him simultaneously the best and worst student in their tactical studies program. Best because his test scores were consistently higher than anyone else's. Worst because he asked questions that made their professors uncomfortable, like why certain standard procedures seemed designed to maximize civilian casualties. The human reached for his water container. 46 alien hearts, circulatory pumps, and various other life-sustaining organs collectively stopped functioning for approximately 2.3 seconds. Marcus lifted the container, examined it briefly, and set it back down without drinking. "Interesting," he murmured, apparently addressing his notes. "The molecular breakdown patterns we studied last week would suggest that most biological toxins require direct ingestion to be effective, though I suppose there are exceptions." Had he noticed? Vextar's 3 eyes swiveled to focus entirely on the human. Impossible. The extract was completely colorless and odorless to most species, unless... Of course! Chip's gelatinous mass rippled with what might have been realization. Humans have those bizarre chemical detection systems in their nasal cavities. What do they call them? Olfactory receptors, supplied Nimra, whose photographic memory was both a blessing and a curse. Though their sensitivity varies dramatically between individuals. Some humans can detect chemical changes at parts per billion concentrations. Xylox's confident smirk was beginning to develop some cracks around the edges. That's impossible. No species has chemical detection that sensitive. Clearly, you haven't been paying attention during xenobiology lectures, Vextar replied dryly. Humans also eat foods that would kill most of us for entertainment. They call it spicy cuisine. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus Thompson standing up and walking directly toward their cluster of desks. Several students made small, involuntary noises that roughly translated to various forms of "oh no" across multiple languages. "Hey there," Marcus said, his tone carrying that particular brand of friendliness that somehow managed to be more terrifying than outright hostility. "I couldn't help but notice some interesting chemistry happening over here. Mind if I join the discussion?" Xylox's skin had shifted from its normal green to a rather unpleasant shade of yellow. "I don't know what you mean, human." "Marcus," the human corrected cheerfully. "And I think you do know what I mean. That's a really fascinating compound you've got there." He gestured toward Xylox's desk, where a small vial of Zeronian deathbloom extract sat in plain sight. Zeronian deathbloom, right? We studied the molecular structure last month. Nasty stuff. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a torture device. "You recognized it?" Pipara's tentacles had gone completely still, which was roughly equivalent to a human holding their breath. Marcus nodded. "Distinctive chemical signature. Sweet almond scent, with an underlying metallic note. Plus, the way it refracts light is pretty unique." He paused, studying Xylox with the kind of expression that suggested he was solving a particularly interesting puzzle. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about the delivery method you chose." Xylox's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. The effect was remarkably similar to a fish experiencing sudden atmospheric exposure. "See, the thing about Zeronian deathbloom," Marcus continued conversationally, "is that it's incredibly effective against most carbon-based life forms. Most of them. But humans have this weird quirk in our biochemistry." He smiled, and Vex Tar was reminded uncomfortably of apex predators back on his home world. "We process certain alkaloid compounds differently than other species, something about our liver enzyme configuration." The classroom had gone so quiet that Vex Tar could hear Cheap's internal fluids circulating. "Are you saying?" Rex Thor's voice came out as barely more than a growl. "Are you saying that poison wouldn't have killed you?" "Oh, it definitely would have killed me," Marcus replied cheerfully. "Just not quickly. And not quietly. Humans have this really inconvenient tendency to become extremely violent when we're dying from poison. Something about survival instincts and adrenaline surges. I probably would have had enough time to— Oh, I don't know." He looked thoughtfully at Xylox. "Break every bone in your body? Maybe redecorate the classroom with your internal organs? Hard to say, really. Pain and impending death make it difficult to maintain precise motor control." Xylox made a sound that was probably supposed to be words, but came out more like a deflating balloon. "The truly fascinating part," Marcus continued, apparently warming to his subject, "is that Zeronian deathbloom has this interesting property, where the victim's pain receptors become hypersensitive before the nervous system starts shutting down. So I would have been in absolutely excruciating agony while I was, hypothetically speaking, turning you into abstract art." Vexus Tar found himself reassessing every previous interaction with the human student. Marcus Thompson had always seemed so polite, so eager to help with group projects, so genuinely interested in everyone's cultures and customs. "But hey," Marcus said, his tone brightening considerably, "that's all hypothetical, right? Since nobody would be stupid enough to actually poison a classmate, especially not during a toxicology lesson where everyone knows exactly what they're looking at." The sound of Professor Kilmthara's approach echoed through the corridor outside. Multiple species possess enhanced hearing when their stress levels spike dramatically. "Right," Xylox croaked. "Hypothetical." Marcus picked up his water container and held it out to Xylox. "Would you like a drink? You look a little dehydrated." If Xylox had possessed a human circulatory system, he would have died of cardiac arrest on the spot. As it was, his chromatophores cycled through approximately 17 different colors, before settling on a sickly, transparent shade. "I'm good," he managed. "You sure? Hydration is really important for proper brain function." Marcus's smile had developed an edge that could have cut through battle armor. "And we wouldn't want anyone making poor decisions due to dehydration, would we?" Professor Kilmthara entered the classroom, carrying a container of what appeared to be writhing, luminescent tentacles. "Excellent timing, everyone. These are Plutonian nightmare slugs, and we're going to study their defensive toxin secretions. I need a volunteer to handle the initial specimen extraction." Every single alien student suddenly became fascinated by their desktop surfaces. "I'll do it," Marcus said immediately. "Sounds fun." Professor Kilmthara's compound eyes focused on the human with what might have been approval. "Very good, Thompson. Your enthusiasm for hands-on learning is commendable." As Marcus walked to the front of the classroom, Vextar noticed that he was still carrying his water container. The same water container that everyone in the room knew was poisoned with enough Zeronian death bloom to kill a small army. "You know what the beautiful part of this situation is?" Cheap whispered, his gelatinous form barely containing his nervous energy. "Please enlighten us," Vextar replied, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know. "Humans are classified as persistence predators. Do you know what that means?" Several students shook their heads, though Rex Thor's expression suggested he was beginning to understand. "It means they don't give up," Chip continued. "Ever. They'll track prey across continents for days or weeks until their target collapses from exhaustion, and then they kill it." At the front of the classroom, Marcus was cheerfully extracting venom from creatures that had evolved specifically to be untouchable. The Plutonian nightmare slugs, sensing a kindred spirit, had actually stopped writhing and were cooperating with the procedure. "So, what you're telling us," Nimrah said slowly, "is that Xylox has just painted a target on himself for a species that evolved to hunt things until they die of exhaustion." "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Xylox, who had been following this conversation with growing horror, made a small whimpering sound that roughly translated to "mommy" in 17 different languages. Marcus finished the venom extraction and held up a test tube containing luminescent green fluid. "This is fascinating, Professor. The molecular structure is completely different from anything we've studied. How does it interact with different species' nervous systems?" "Excellent question," Professor Kilmthara replied. "The toxin targets specific neural pathway configurations. It's particularly effective against species with distributed nervous systems, but has minimal impact on centralized neural architectures like those found in humans." "So, it wouldn't affect me much?" "Correct. Human neural organization provides natural resistance to most distributed system toxins." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then glanced back at the class with that same friendly smile. His eyes found Xylox and lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. "Good to know." The rest of the lesson proceeded normally, if one ignored the fact that 46 alien students were collectively having what could best be described as existential crises. They learned about 17 different methods of toxin delivery. They studied antidotes for poisons that could kill gods. They practiced identifying chemical weapons by smell alone. And through it all, Marcus Thompson took notes with the dedication of someone who genuinely found the subject matter fascinating. Which, given recent events, was absolutely terrifying. When class ended, most students fled the room as quickly as their various locomotion methods allowed. Xylox tried to blend into the crowd, but Marcus's voice stopped him at the door. "Hey, Xylox? Could I talk to you for a minute?" The Greenfang heir turned around with the expression of someone who had just realized they were standing in a minefield during an earthquake. "Sure," he squeaked. Marcus approached with that same casual friendliness he'd displayed all semester. To anyone who hadn't witnessed the previous hour, he would have seemed like the same helpful, curious human who always volunteered for dangerous assignments and asked thoughtful questions during lectures. "I just wanted to thank you," Marcus said. Xylox's chromatophores went through another rapid color cycle. "Thank me? For the lesson. See, back on Earth, we have this saying about gift horses and mouths. The idea is that when someone gives you something valuable, you don't question their motives too closely." Marcus paused, studying Xylox with the kind of attention a biologist might give to an interesting specimen. "But the thing about us humans is that we're really, really good at learning from experience." "I don't understand." Marcus's smile never wavered. "You will." As Marcus left the classroom, still carrying his poisoned water container, Vex-Tar found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about human psychology. The various intelligence briefings had mentioned that humans were unpredictable, but this seemed like a significant oversight in the documentation. "Think he's going to kill Xylox?" Rex-Thor asked, his tone suggesting professional curiosity rather than moral concern. "Probably not immediately," Vex-Thor replied. "Humans seem to prefer psychological warfare to direct confrontation. They call it playing the long game." Through the classroom window, they could see Marcus walking across the academy courtyard, chatting cheerfully with other students. He looked completely normal, harmless even. Which was, Vex-Tar realized, probably the most terrifying thing about humans. They looked just like everyone else, right up until they didn't. 3 days later, Vex-Tar was beginning to understand why humans had such a fearsome reputation in certain corners of the galaxy. It wasn't their technology, though that was impressive enough. It wasn't their military prowess, though their war records spoke for themselves. It was their capacity for sustained, creative malevolence, disguised as ordinary social interaction. Marcus Thompson had not killed Xylox Greenfang. He had done something far worse. He had befriended him. "This is psychological torture," Cheap observed, his gelatinous form rippling with distress as they watched Marcus help Xylox with his quantum mechanics homework in the academy cafeteria. "I've studied 17 different forms of mental warfare, and this is somehow more disturbing than all of them combined." Vex-Tar had to agree. For 72 hours, Marcus had been the perfect friend to Xylox. He saved seats at meals. He shared study notes. He laughed at Xylox's terrible jokes and defended him when other students made snide comments about mining family corruption scandals. The most terrifying part was that Marcus seemed genuinely sincere about it. Maybe he actually forgave him? Pipara suggested hopefully, though her tentacles were knotted with anxiety. Humans are supposed to be capable of forgiveness, right? Humans are capable of many things, Rex-Thor replied darkly. That's the problem. They weren't the only ones watching the situation with morbid fascination. Word had spread throughout the academy about what had happened in advanced toxicology class. Students from across the galaxy were treating the developing friendship like a case study in predator behavior. The betting pools were getting ridiculous. Nimra had started a comprehensive spreadsheet, tracking various theories about Marcus's ultimate plan. Current favorites included slow poison revenge, framing Xylox for war crimes, and psychological breakdown, followed by public humiliation. Vex-Tar's personal theory was simpler and somehow more frightening. Marcus was genuinely enjoying himself. "You have to admit," said Crixita, a Vorthan exchange student who had joined their observation group, "it's fascinating from an anthropological perspective. Human social dynamics are so much more complex than our xenology textbooks suggested." "Complex is one word for it," Vex-Tar muttered, watching Marcus explain orbital mechanics with the patience of a saint, while Xylox struggled with concepts that most species mastered in elementary education. The breakthrough came during their next advanced toxicology class. Professor Kilmthara had announced a practical examination involving the identification and neutralization of unknown poisons. Students would work in pairs, with one serving as the victim and the other as the medic. Marcus immediately volunteered to partner with Xylox. "This is it," Cheap whispered excitedly. "This is when the revenge happens. Marcus is going to poison him during the practical exam." But as they watched the exercise unfold, it became clear that Marcus had something entirely different in mind. The unknown poison turned out to be Regellian nerve agent, a particularly nasty compound that caused paralysis followed by respiratory failure. Standard treatment involved immediate injection of counteragent theta-7, followed by cardiovascular support until the toxin metabolized. Xylox, serving as the victim, had been given a mild dose that would simulate the early symptoms without actual danger. Marcus, as the medic, was supposed to identify the poison and administer treatment within 5 minutes. Instead, Marcus spent the first 3 minutes of the exercise explaining to Xylox exactly what Regellian nerve agent did to its victims, in vivid, clinical detail. "The interesting thing about this particular toxin," Marcus said conversationally, while Xylox lay on the examination table experiencing simulated muscle weakness, "is that it leaves the victim completely conscious throughout the entire process. You can feel everything that's happening, but you can't move, can't speak, can't even blink." Xylox's eyes widened with what was probably terror, though the nerve agent simulation made it impossible for him to express it physically. "The respiratory paralysis is actually the worst part," Marcus continued, checking his chronometer with professional detachment. "Your diaphragm stops working, so you're essentially suffocating while fully aware. Most victims spend the last few minutes of their lives in absolute panic, knowing exactly what's happening but completely unable to do anything about it." Professor Kilmthara, monitoring from across the room, nodded approvingly. "Excellent clinical description, Thompson. Now proceed with treatment." "Of course," Marcus replied cheerfully. He prepared the counteragent theta-7 injection with practiced efficiency. The antidote works almost immediately once administered. Heart rate returns to normal, muscle control comes back gradually, and most patients make a full recovery within minutes. He held the injector up to the light, checking for air bubbles with professional Narration's thoroughness. "Though I suppose," he added thoughtfully, "if someone wanted to be really cruel, they could just stand here describing the symptoms until the victim actually started dying. The antidote would still work, even at the last possible second, but the psychological trauma would be substantial." Xylox made a small, strangled sound that might have been a whimper. Marcus immediately administered the injection. "There we go. You'll feel better in just a moment." As Xylox's muscle control returned, and he sat up on the examination table, Marcus patted his shoulder with genuine warmth. "You did great. I know that simulation can be pretty unnerving, but you handled it like a champion." The rest of the class watched this interaction with the kind of fascinated horror typically reserved for natural disasters or particularly spectacular accidents. "Did he just?" Krixta began. "Explain in exhaustive detail what it feels like to die horribly while his victim was experiencing a simulated version of that exact death?" Bextar finished. Yes, he did. And then he was genuinely nice about it afterward? Also, yes. After class, Marcus and Xylox walked out together, discussing weekend plans like old friends. Marcus had invited Xylox to join a study group for their upcoming strategic warfare exam. Xylox had accepted with what appeared to be grateful enthusiasm. "I can't watch this anymore," Pipara announced, her tentacles writhing with distress. "This is either the most elaborate revenge plot in galactic history, or humans are just naturally terrifying without even trying." "Why can't it be both?" Rex Thor suggested. The question was answered 2 days later during their strategic warfare class when Professor Volkara announced a special simulation exercise. Students would be divided into opposing forces and given a theoretical conflict scenario to resolve. The winning team would receive significant extra credit toward their final grades. Marcus and Xylox found themselves on the same side, defending a mining colony against hostile invasion forces. Xylox, desperate to prove himself worthy of his new friendship, had volunteered to design their defensive strategy. It was, objectively speaking, terrible. The plan involved spreading their limited forces across multiple defensive positions, leaving each group vulnerable to concentrated attack. Elementary tactical theory suggested massing forces at key choke points, but Xylox had apparently missed that particular lesson. Marcus studied the strategy proposal with the same friendly attention he brought to everything else. "This is really interesting, Xylox. You're thinking outside the box, which I appreciate. You think it'll work?" Xylox asked eagerly. "Well," Marcus replied diplomatically, "it's certainly creative, though I wonder if we might want to consider a few small adjustments." What followed was a masterclass in tactical redesign, disguised as collegial collaboration. Marcus asked leading questions that guided Xylox toward better positioning. He suggested minor tweaks that fundamentally transformed the defensive strategy. He praised Xylox's creativity, while systematically replacing every element of the original plan. The end result was a defensive scheme that would have impressed actual military strategists. Xylox, convinced that he had developed it himself with Marcus's supportive input, was practically glowing with pride. Their simulation began 3 hours later. The attacking forces, led by a team of advanced military cadets from the Centauri Academy, expected easy victory against what they assumed would be typical student-level opposition. They had not accounted for the fact that one of the defending team members was a human who had apparently learned military tactics by studying historical Earth conflicts. The battle was over in 47 minutes. The attacking forces never made it past the first defensive perimeter. Every assault was anticipated, every flanking maneuver countered, every tactical innovation neutralized with surgical precision. The defenders didn't just win, they achieved total victory without losing a single unit. "Brilliant work, Xylox," Marcus said afterward, shaking his partner's hand with apparent sincerity. "That defensive strategy was absolutely perfect. You should be proud of yourself." Xylox was indeed proud. He spent the next 2 hours explaining to anyone who would listen how he had developed the winning strategy, with Marcus providing encouraging nods and supportive comments throughout the entire recitation. Vextar, watching from across the post-simulation debriefing room, finally understood what Marcus Thompson was doing. He wasn't seeking revenge against Xylox Greenfang. He was creating a monster. "You see it now, don't you?" Cheap had approached quietly, his gelatinous form rippling with what might have been admiration or horror. "The human isn't trying to destroy Xylox, he's trying to improve him." "That's even more terrifying than revenge," Vextar replied. It was true. Marcus was systematically turning Xylox from an arrogant, incompetent heir into someone who might actually deserve his eventual inheritance. He was teaching him tactics, encouraging his confidence, and gradually reshaping his entire approach to problem-solving. And he was doing it through friendship, encouragement, and genuine care for Xylox's development. "Humans," Rex Thor observed from behind them, "are absolutely horrifying." The final proof came during their last week at the Academy, when Marcus announced that he had recommended Xylox for advanced officer training. The recommendation, signed by 3 professors and backed by Marcus's stellar academic record, would fast-track Xylox into a prestigious military command program. "I can't thank you enough," Xylox said, his chromatophores cycling through colors that indicated deep emotional gratitude. "You've been the best friend I could have asked for." "Just paying it forward," Marcus replied with that same warm smile he'd worn throughout their entire friendship. "Besides, I have a feeling you're going to do great things someday." As they watched Xylox walk away, practically bouncing with excitement about his bright future, Vextar turned to Marcus with a question that had been bothering him for weeks. "Why?" he asked simply. Marcus considered the question with the same thoughtful attention he brought to everything else. "Back on Earth, we have this concept called killing them with kindness. The idea is that sometimes the best way to deal with your enemies is to be so relentlessly nice to them that they become better people despite themselves. And if they don't become better people? Marcus's smile gained that familiar edge that could cut through starship armor. Then, at least you gave them every opportunity to prove they deserved what happened next. Vextar stared at the human for a long moment. You're saying that this entire friendship was a test? I'm saying, Marcus replied carefully, that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. Xylox took that chance and ran with it. I'm proud of him. And if he hadn't? The pause that followed was filled with the kind of silence that suggested multiple possible futures had just collapsed into a single, much darker timeline. Then we'd be having a very different conversation right now, Marcus said finally. As Marcus walked away, heading toward his next class with the same cheerful energy he'd displayed all semester, Vextar found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about human nature. Humans weren't just persistence predators who hunted their prey to exhaustion. They were something far more dangerous. A species capable of genuine mercy, backed by the absolute certainty that they could destroy anything that betrayed that mercy. The truly terrifying part was that they seemed to prefer the mercy option most of the time. You know what the scariest thing about humans is? Chip asked, apparently following a similar line of thought. Their capacity for violence? Vextar suggested. No, Chip replied, his form rippling with philosophical distress. Their capacity for forgiveness, because it means they're always choosing to be nice to us. Vextar watched Marcus disappear around a corner, still carrying that same water container he'd refused to drink from 3 weeks ago. The container that had contained enough poison to kill a small army, and that Marcus had kept as what could only be described as a memento. I'm putting in for a transfer, Vextar announced. I want to study human psychology from a safe distance, like maybe another galaxy. As they walked toward their next class, passing groups of students who were still discussing the legendary friendship between the human and the heir to the Greenfang fortune, Vextar couldn't shake the feeling that they had all just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. A human had forgiven someone who tried to murder him, and somehow that was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever seen. The story would spread throughout the academy, then beyond to other institutions, then across the inhabited galaxy. The tale of Marcus Thompson and Xylox Greenfang would become required reading in xenopsychology courses, a case study in human behavioral patterns that challenged every assumption about interspecies relations. But for now, it was just another day at the Galactic Military Academy, where 46 alien students had learned that humans were capable of something far more dangerous than hatred or violence. They were capable of love, and that changed everything.